Hi, everyone. I'm Adrian. That's Philip. That's Jay. We're from Audio Excellence Canada. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about a comparison between the Magnepan LRS and the 0.7. As many of you know, the LRS came out a few months ago and has been a huge success for Magnepan. It's their most affordable speaker. It's a gateway drug, as we like to call it, because if you happen to like the kind of sound that planars give you, this is the least expensive planar speaker that you can buy. Am I right, guys? I don't think.
There's nothing.
I don't think there's anything even close in terms of the price, right? And just to put things in perspective, we're so back ordered on Magnepans, it's not funny, and we don't actively try to sell them because we can't get them. The 0.7 is the model above it. I'll give you some basic objective specs first. The LRS is $650 US or 880 Canadian. The 0.7 is 1400 US or 1890 Canadian. The LRS is rated 50 to 20 kilohertz. The 0.7 is rated 45 to 20 kilohertz. Both are 86 dB sensitivity. The LRS is 14.5 inches wide, 48 inches high, and 1 inch deep versus 15 inches wide, 54 inches high, and 1.25 inches deep. So basically, the main difference is slightly taller for the 0.7 and slightly wider. The nice thing about the LRS, if you live in the States and there's no dealer local to you, you can contact the manufacturer and they have a 60-day in-home trial. That's fantastic. Now, in Canada, it doesn't apply. So please do not contact us and say, hey, I saw the program.
There's an in-home trial. It's accompanied by a payment of $880 or $1890.
That's right. Pay us. You can try it as long as you want. So, yeah, contact the factory directly if you wanted to try the LRSs if you're in the States. So why don't we start with Jay? What did you think of the LRS versus the 0.7?
I would have Philip start this one.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Philip. You take the first straw.
I have to take the first straw?
Yes. I'm
Why?
still regaining from my morning routine of waking up. So go ahead.
Oh, yeah. We're doing all of this like early in the morning. So early, it's almost 11 o'clock here, local time.
Still morning for me. Just go.
Well, so the story goes something like this. I disliked the LRS when I first heard it, and we tried it with a couple of different amplifiers, none of which really worked well because it's a demanding, difficult little speaker to drive. But if you stick with it and you end up using something like the Hegel or something like that has those kinds of characteristics that the Hegel has, it's an amazingly excellent little speaker. I personally prefer the LRS over the 0.7s. The 0.7s to me have never, I didn't like it as much as the 1.7, mostly because on most tracks, the 0.7 seems to try very hard to present a very focused, detailed soundstage, and the information it's kind of portraying to me ends up being a little bit analytical. The 1.7 seems to have a fuller kind of experience.
Hang on. Before we go further, you might want to clarify what a 1.7 is for people who don't know.
Well, so Magnepan makes three kind of introductory speakers. There's the LRS now, there's the 0.7, which is $1,890, and there's the 1.7, which is their big panel, or bigger panel, and that sells for, in Canadian dollars, $2,700.
Just under $3,000, yeah.
Just under $3,000. And that was quite a big panel, so it would dominate a room. And because of the size, it just has a fuller, more natural, kind of warm sound, which I like. And the 0.7s, because it's a smaller panel, doesn't have quite that, but it's very detailed, really meticulous. And this is the kind of thing that you notice with it. It doesn't matter what kind of track. I use Hey Laura by Gregory Porter because it has a really beautiful, natural, voice through it. Gregory, he has such, it's so evocative, it's so emotional. The song, you should be able to hear how he's hurting inside. And with the 0.7, it always seemed like he was in the other room, and I could hear everything that was going on, but I really couldn't see it. And with the LRS, the amazing thing about the LRS is that in some ways it's not as accurate. It's a smaller panel, but it has a slightly warmer tonality to it. And to me, when I play Hey Laura, I get it. It hits me. I understand the emotion of it way better than I do with the 0.7. So the LRS to me has a more natural presentation that is, again, the word, evocative, and it's
so long as you don't use the word.
Yes,
everybody now.
No, I'm not using it.
Organic.
Oh, Jay. But in any ways,
that's $1 in the swear jar.
Yeah. It's emotionally, for me, much easier to connect to what's happening within the recording. And I mean, I love that recording. I play that for every demo that I do, and I play it actually for every piece of equipment I test. I love that recording. It's fabulous.
Okay.
So the LRS for me is just I connect to it better. It seems to have a slightly warmer kind of presentation, especially in the mid-range. It's a little bit more forgiving, but it's not forgiving, and you need to understand kind of what I'm talking, because they all have the same panel now.
Only in comparison.
Only in comparison, yes. I mean, they're all three speakers, LRS and the 0.7s are excellent, but slightly different shading with the way it presents itself from a kind of tonality standpoint. And I find it for music that I listen to that matter to me internally. From an emotional standpoint, I find the LRS to be more connective.
Okay. Just before we go further, let me again remind everybody, as Philip has just shown, none of this is scripted. Philip has just chosen as a preference a speaker that costs $1,000 less, for all intents and purposes, than the model. In other words, he prefers the LRS over the 0.7s. So we're always very honest about our opinions, regardless of whether or not the store may or may not benefit from it. Jay, go ahead.
So one of my first speakers ever was the Magnepan 0.7.
That's right.
So I generally speaking, I like the Magnepan sound. I like the panel sound. And, I did a rave review of the Magnepan LRS and so on and so forth. So, when there's always something new, right, it always seems better. So in the beginning, in the very beginning, just like Philip mentioned, I wasn't very impressed with the Magnepan until we got the pairing right with the Hegel.
Well, yeah, with the LRS, yeah. That was definitely an issue.
But hearing the 0.7s with the Hegel, the same Hegel and so forth, to me, I feel like the 0.7 is still a better speaker, at least to me. In terms of bass transients, or even, for example, when I hear Madness by
Muse.
Yeah, Madness by Muse. The LRS is a little bit lacking for me in terms of not so much speed, but just the decay and transients response is a little bit lacking for me compared to the 0.7s. Obviously, the 0.7s, you're gonna expect to put it in about a medium-sized room, right? Would you say that, Philip?
Yeah, it can, because it's a bigger panel, so you can get it. Put it bigger.
What
room.
I noticed was that in the front room where we put the LRS, when we had the 0.7s there, I found it was a little bit too bassy in the lower mid bass.
Well, it's a smaller room, we actually have it fairly close to the front wall.
That's right. So I found that, and in fact, we had a client here, and he wanted to obviously listen to the LRS. So I played the LRS for him, and then of course he sees the 0.7 in the corner, and he goes, "Can I hear the 0.7s? I want to hear how the bigger panels sound." So I hook up the 0.7, and his response was, "Well, I like the LRS better in this room because the 0.7 is too bassy. It's not as clear," is what he said in his words. And I agreed with him because in that room, it was certainly more bassy than how I knew the 0.7s. Now, I know the 0.7s can be very, very transparent and not as bassy in that room specifically. So I told him so. And my experience with putting it in about a medium-sized room. So in its respective rooms, 0.7s in a medium-sized room versus the LRS in a smaller sized room, I say that they're very, very, similar. And if I had to pick one, my preference would be still the 0.7, just because of that extra bass oomph. Yeah.
Okay. So this is interesting because I normally agree with Philip more than I do with Jay, not for any reason other than I think musically our tastes are more similar. But also, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is when I think about my musical journey, my quote-unquote audiophile journey, when I first started back in the 80s, what was fascinating to me back then was I had been listening to whatever speakers that the magazines generally would recommend, and those were the mainstream magazines. For all you old folks like me out there, you'll remember Stereo Review, High Fidelity, Audio, and these magazines were typically very objective based. In other words, they would measure everything, and sonically it would basically, if the measurements were good, they'd say it, and it sounds great, it sounds good, go buy it. And so based on those reviews, I think in one of the earliest videos that we did, I talked about going through a magazine called Audio, their annual guide. Do you still remember that, Philip?
Yeah.
It's a thick magazine, and it was a listing of virtually everything that was available in North America. And I would go through all the different specifications and look for the best numbers. Being an engineer, this was the thing that, drove me. So speakers that had the highest sensitivities like Klipsch's and Show in Vegas, right? And electronics that had the lowest noise floor, the best power, and so on and so forth. So back then would have been Carvers and Thresholds and phase linears, if you remember those. And very quickly, when I listened to those speakers, I realized I hated them. They sounded terrible. And I couldn't understand why that would be the case, because on the one hand, the magazine said it should sound great and the numbers would look great. And meanwhile, they sounded terrible. And it was only when I chanced upon, ironically enough, Ring Audio, because Philip also went to Ring Audio, and I heard these little speakers, which I found out later with the LS35As, and I was stunned at the magical quality of bringing me into the music. And then looking at the numbers and said, this makes no sense whatsoever. But I had to trust my ears. So, and then also with the LS35As, I heard something I'd never seen in any of the magazines before, something called soundstaging and imaging, which the salesperson educated me on, and detail. And then then I chanced upon a speaker called the Spica TC50s. Do you remember those?
Yep.
And again, they imaged like crazy. It had no bass, but they imaged like crazy. And then the ProX, the little super tablets and the mini tablets and so on. And now as I look back, I realized that I was chasing something that got me really excited from a hobby perspective, not necessarily from a musical perspective. And also from a musical perspective, my music back then was a lot different than the kind of music that I listen today. So I think as a result of that, generally Jay prefers slightly different biases when it comes to performance than I do. Than I do. But in this case, I would say I agree more with Jay, but perhaps for different reasons. So we have about 4 or 5 different listening rooms, and one of the rooms that we have, one of these days we'll do this video in there. It's about 14 feet wide and about 18 feet long. And the ceiling is acoustic tile ceiling, is about roughly 9 feet tall, but the actual ceiling, the real ceiling, is about 20 feet tall. And many of you will know the acoustic tiles really don't stop anything from getting through, especially bass. So I use that room to test both the LRS and the 0.7s. And I used the Hegel H90. And the reason I chose the H90 was because I thought, well, I'd like to use electronics that probably a lot of people will max out at for that kind of price point speakers. There's no point using very expensive electronics to hear what these speakers are capable of. So I started with the LRSs, and as I mentioned earlier, we've sold a lot of these LRSs, and so we're intimately familiar with them. And the system I used was a Lumen U1 mini server playing Tidal through Roon. And then the digital out using a coax cable into the Hegel H90, and then using Nordost cables into the speakers. So for me, the LRS was like, oh, this is so good. I'm constantly amazed at how good the sound is for this kind of money, especially if you like, as I said earlier, the panel presentation, which is a big open spacious sound, very, very good mid-range detail, no boxy coloration, just a really nice presentation of sound. Then when I switched over to the 0.7, I was initially taken aback. Now, the 0.7 has been out for a few years, and it's a speaker that we sell a lot of. I don't do a lot of presentations to clients these days because my responsibilities are different. So it's been a while since I actually had a chance to listen to the 0.7. So when I listened to the 0.7, I was like, wow, this is good. Everything that the LRS
it's only good?
Yeah, everything that the LRS is, it's better. And I couldn't quite describe it. So I started to go through the playlist, and for those of you that's interested in the playlist, you can see a video that we did, the three of us, about our favorite recordings that we use regularly. I'll just give you some examples. When I played Cowboy Junkies Trinity sessions, my notes were even bigger soundstage, very airy, nice sense of height and details, fuller sound, lower bass. And then the other thing I immediately noted right away was you hear details you've never noticed before. Now, this is interesting. When I wrote that down, I had to stop. I've been playing Cowboy Junkies ever since I discovered the album back in the late 80s. So it's not a new recording to me. And yet it shocked me that the details that were always there that I've noticed sort of subconsciously now were even more obvious, to the point where it became conscious. It wasn't just a subconscious thing. Christian McBride, perfect example. He's playing a night train. He's set behind the speakers. I can literally picture his fingers snapping on the strings. This wasn't something that I did before. I mean, I always knew he was snapping, and so on. This was something that I listened for before, but now I actually pictured it. Same with when the bow was scraping across the strings. Another example. Now, this is something for you guys who really enjoy specific details and examples. Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. About 37 seconds into the track, you can very clearly hear David Gilmour open his lips, clear his throat, and then start playing his guitar. And then for the first time, again, I've been playing this cut a long time. The guys are probably sick of me playing it all the time, but you will actually hear his fingering when he's sustaining a note. He does something called finger vibrato, where he moves his hand to increase the sustain and vibration of that particular note. It's always been there. I've always heard it, but now it's right there. And I was shocked that it was first time I actually paid attention to it. Same thing with Fink Troubles What You're In. The ambience of the hall and the voice really clear. Philip was saying how everything is so clear. It's very, very true. And the ambience was so rich. It's almost like it was dripping. I was like, wow, I'm shocked at what I heard. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. One really good cut as an example of something that you guys might want to check into. Sarah Morale Vincent. I'll get some of these track information over to Jay when he's editing it, so he can put the covers and the information in the description box. When she's singing, command performance right there in the room. I was emotionally drained by that particular cut. Ben Webster's "Man I Love." Jay mentioned in an earlier video that he plays the saxophone. If you like saxophone, this is a superb cut. You'll hear the saxophone right up close, and the clarity of the reed is just stunning. And then two last cuts. A friend of mine, Jason, introduced me to this particular one. I don't think I've ever played it for you guys. Tony Joe White, a cut called "Homemade Ice Cream." When he first played it for me in his house in a cottage, we were using the Wilson Alexis with a full set of D'Agostino electronics with, just basically the very best electronics and cables. And I noticed right away that I was just grooving to the music. It was just so good. Very, very involving. And then I immediately came back to the store and started to play that piece of music on our systems. And I felt so sad because I didn't feel the same kind of emotional connection as at Jason's house. And I refused to play that cut now. So this morning I decided I'll play that on the 0.7s with the Hegels. And I had it set at fairly loud volume. And about a minute into it, I noticed I was grooving again. The harmonica was just amazing. It just drew me right in. If you play it loud enough, see if you can stop yourself from moving and grooving. It's just a great cut. One of the things I really love about Philip, the way that he evaluates music systems, I should say, is whether or not ultimately it draws him into the music. It's not just about the micro little things that Jay and I fuss over, the soundstage and so on and so forth, and that's important as well. But whether it moves him. So he mentions about Gregory Porter. Many years ago, I was at CES and walked into a company that was demonstrating home theater. I can't remember now what the brands were, but they were playing Concert for George. So George Harrison had passed away, and Eric Clapton and Ringo Starr and a bunch of other top-notch musicians organized this concert at the Royal Albert Hall. And to give you a short list of some of the artists, you have Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Billy Preston, Tom Petty, Eric Clapton, George Harrison's son, Danny Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Carl Perkins, Mark Mann of ELO. Just the list was just outstanding. It's like a who's who. Anyway, so they were playing. Paul McCartney had just finished a song called "For You Blue," and I walked in right as he was finishing. So I missed the first part, and he finishes the song, and then he goes into an intro, and I will never forget this till the day I die. If you have the CD, listen to the part at the end of "For You Blue." Starts around 2:32. If you have the disc, it's actually something. Anyway, he talks a little bit about how he would visit George Harrison at his house, and after dinner, they break out the ukuleles, and then Paul McCartney would play a song for George. I'm choking up as I'm talking about this. I remember watching it for the first time. I was bawling. I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. I grew up listening to the Beatles, and anyway, you can watch this on YouTube if you don't have the disc or the Blu-ray. I was so into the music. It was remarkable. I switched over to the LRS to see if the magic was still there. And it was, kind of, but not to the same intensity as the 0.7s. So for me, the LRS is a superb buy. If you are in the market for under $1,000, I don't think you'll find a better speaker. But if you can stretch to the 0.7 for me, I would definitely go with the 0.7s. Why don't we talk about caveats, guys? Philip, you mentioned a couple earlier. Why don't you start with that? What are some of the caveats you would have for anybody considering Magnepans?
Well, there's a certain formula to choosing amplifiers as an overall approach. And I know for a lot of individuals, often they will budget, say, 1x for a pair of speakers and 1x for an amplifier. So if a LRS costs $1,000, they budget $1,000 for an amplifier. In most cases, with the LRS or even with the 0.7s or the 1.7s, that does not hold true. We found this to be something that is across the board. You have to spend a little bit more, and this is why we found that the Hegel H90 was the minimum that would give you the right kind of amplifier connection, the one amplifier that would drive it to what a speaker is capable of doing. So generally speaking, you're spending 2 times the amount of what you spend on the speaker. Whereas, a lot of dynamic speakers, that's not the case. So that is a caveat in that where you save on the Magnepan, you actually have to spend that bit you save on the amplifier. And that's not always such a bad thing because you end up with a much better product. But you do have to spend a bit more. It's not necessarily a budget kind of situation because of all the money you have to spend on other things to get it to the same point.
Any others?
Well, specifically, there's a whole argument about what sound staging is and what imaging is. And the fact of the matter is, panels don't image. And lots of people say they do, but they don't image. They soundstage spectacularly, and you can hear lots of detail. But when compared to a dynamic speaker that essentially approximates a point source, panels can't do that.
Why don't you take a minute and just sort of describe what you mean by soundstage versus image?
So soundstage is like you go to a live venue and you hear the reverberations and the echoes all around you, and you know what the size of the room is. You know kind of like the band is in the middle, and the way they amplify it, the way they amplify it, with the way they amplify it, it sounds like there's a wall of sound coming at you, but it's big. It sounds big. You can hear the size of the room. There's like a space. So sound staging is like a recreation of that space kind of effect. Imaging is stuff that happens inside of that space, specifically so that you can actually kind of see almost like an image where you can hear what almost seems like an image. So within that space, the size of, say, the hand clap, or, like someone is playing or singing, the size of the voice, and it's like human size. And you can see all that. And if the person's moving around, I mean, the cliche is that if someone's holding a triangle and going around the room playing the triangle, you'll be able to hear where the triangle is transiting within the room. And you know that it's specifically a small little instrument playing a very clear tone. So that's imaging. And it can be, again, very evocative because it allows you to connect to it so much better. But panels don't do that because they don't approximate physically a point source that most speakers that use a 1-inch or, say, a 3/4 inch tweeter can do. It's just simple physics. There's no real way of getting around it. The only one panel that I know that's been able to overcome this is the quad, and because it uses a delay circuit, and of course what it's trying to do is approximate a point source. Okay. And it's just physics.
Jay, any thoughts about caveats?
I think Bill covered most of it, but I would say amplification, just to summarize, placement.
Placement's huge.
Placement.
So why don't we go a little bit into placement?
Okay, well, placement, there's a general formula to how you want to place the Magnepans from the back wall. I believe it was 6 foot back wall. So in terms of placement, but you would have to play around with it a little bit. The idea is that you want it around 5 to 6 foot from the back wall, if I'm not wrong, and the side wall as well. And again, it's a lot more placement sensitive compared to other speakers. So you have to just play around with it. You do need some breathing room. You're not gonna fit it into a very small space. So that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is that with the Maggies, they're very light. And so they're quite easy to move around. So a lot of our clients, what they'll do is for normal circumstances, they might have the speakers very close to the wall for background music listening and so on. And then when they want to hear the speakers properly, you just slide the speakers out. So this way, they're not in the traffic path, they're out of the way. And then when you want to sit down and listen, by moving them out, the sound gets so much better. So it's actually worth spending a bit of time to optimize the placement of the speakers. The other thing that Wendell Diller from Magnepan also strongly suggests is to make sure, if you want to really optimize the speakers, when you're sitting down, measure that the distance from the bass panel and to you versus the distance from the tweeter to you is identical. So this way, the sound comes to your ears at the same time. I think that's all the caveats I've got in mind. You guys have anything else? No? All right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you like this video, please share, subscribe, and turn on notification. And if you have any comments or questions, you can either fill them down below or email us directly, and we'll try to get to everyone as quickly as possible. Thanks very much. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.